Good morning, Ashley. This is Penelope Pitts, and I just want to say thank you for your post and your honesty in your post. And so, what I would like to do is just touch on a few things that I took away from the post and a little bit of internet searching I did after reading your post. It kind of prompted some interest for me. You started out with your post by talking about MAT and how it works in the body, in the brain, and what the doctors use it for. You also talked about how doctors can give someone an opioid antagonist and a non-opioid drug that sits on the same receptors and blocks them. So, when you were talking about, I started to think about in my community, not in my community, but in my state, in the state of Delaware, there are not a whole lot of clinics, but there are clinics. And when you see the clinics that pass out the naloxone or the Suboxone or whatever like that, how it's almost like a assembly line. You just see this crowd of people, and then all of a sudden it's empty, and then there's another crowd of people. But you went on to say, and I don't want to get away from that. I went on to say, I believe that if we are just substituting one opioid for another, we're not moving the dial much. It's a terrible idea, in my opinion, to replace one addiction with another. I understand that assistance may be needed to win the fight, but it's not a one-size-fits-all recovery. I'm aware the numbers are much higher for MAT patients, but it still seems very wrong. So with that, I said, I wanted to see if there were any research out there where people were anti-MAT. And not saying that you are, but I wanted to see what was out there in regards to research regarding anti-MAT. So when I did a search, I ran across a newspaper article about these two ladies that were doing a research on that. And the article was called, in the research paper is called "The Moral Hazard of Life-Saving Innovations, Naloxone Access, Opioid Abuse and Crime." And this was written by these two ladies called, the first one, her name is Jennifer Doleac, Doleac, and Anita Mukherjee, and it's Mukherjee. So I'll read quickly a little bit of some of their findings and what the reason they did this. They said, "We worry that increasing access to naloxone may do more than just increase the chances of surviving an overdose. When activity becomes less risky, people are more likely to engage in it. Economists call this moral hazard. For instance, researchers have found that people become more likely to engage in risky sex after HIV became more treatable. It could be that when an opioid overdose is more easily treatable by naloxone, people are more likely to engage in risky opioid abuse." And so they said, in doing their finding, they found out, some of their research findings. I'll just read that in a few minutes. But first of all, they said what we generated also was an unintended side effect of a tremendous degree of outrage and opposition to our hypothesis and our results. So they really got a lot of pushback. A lot of people were really angry and upset that they were even doing this research on this. So they said, how we measure the effects of these naloxone access laws on opioid-related ER visits, opioid-related crime, and opioid-related mortality. And they did the research in the area where they live in the Midwest. And they said the Midwest has the highest rate of opioid addiction in the country. We find that on average across the country, broadening access to naloxone led to more opioid-related ER visits and opioid-related crime, with no net reduction in opioid-related mortality. Our interpretation of this finding is that people are using opioids more often and in more potent forms, like fentanyl, when they have naloxone as a safety net. And so they went on with their findings. And so what I'll just go ahead and briefly go to what their recommendations are. And they felt that people, when they have that safety net, they tend to use more. So in the end, they have some recommendations of what they feel that policy should do to help people that have addictions. They said our policy recommendations are: one, to consider these moral hazards effects when making naloxone more easily available, and two, to implement policies that can help mitigate any unintended costs. For instance, invest more resources in drug treatment and find ways to encourage those who have overdosed to get help. And they said they know it won't be a quick fix, but being able to help people by not just giving them their drug, but to help that whole person. You know, what's going on here, what's causing this addiction, you know, that whole person approach, that the education, the psychosocial, all that, to help all that. They feel that that would be the most beneficial, and the money would go to more better use to help people. So in a nutshell, I appreciate your post, and thank you for being very honest. Bye.